I'm Bruce Fumi, and this is all that's left standing of the east port of Dundee city walls. But today I'm going to tell you about the day that the rest of the walls and the town of Dundee made their stand against the invading English forces of Oliver Cromwell. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. I was asked by the Scottish Cat 32 to talk about the siege of Dundee. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think that the Scottish Cat 32 is either his real name or his job title. What's more, if I'm honest, whilst I vaguely knew about the siege, it really wasn't on my radar to do a video about it. I believe nowadays they say, my bad. You see, my town's the next one further up the River Tay here, Emphy, Perth. See, that's how they speak here in Dundee. El hey twa pes a bridie and an a. That's what they say. You'll hear them in the shops. You'll hear them saying that. Like, not just the bakeries, like all the shops, right? See, people will go into PC World to buy a computer and they'll say, El hey twa pes a bridie and an a. And the guy behind the counter, the sales guy, will say, you want your pet apple? As opposed to Wendy's. The point is that the two towns look suspiciously along the Tay at each other. But today is about a time that Dundee stood up when Perth didn't. The story's set during the War of the Three Kingdoms, or what lazy Anglo-centred people call the English Civil War. Now, don't take that the wrong way. Some of my best friends are lazy and Anglo-centric. But the English had chopped Charles I's head off without even mentioning it to the Scottish Parliament. Scots were furious. And on the 1st of January 1651, they crowned Charles's son as Charles II at Scone, further up the river there. The Kingdom of Scots was once again at odds with what was now the English Republic. And before long, Oliver Cromwell was heading north with his new model army that defeated David Leslie and his forces at Dundee. Now, little point of interest here, some of you might have seen a very old video of mine where I explain how Leslie led the godly host of Scottish forces across the English border to join English parliamentary forces against Charles I in the decisive Battle of Marston Moor. Essentially the beginning of the end of the First English Civil War. And you might be a wee bit confused by this. Suffice to say that the War of the Three Kingdoms was a smorgasbord of bits and pieces and a hodgepodge patchwork of different religious, constitutional and nationalist loyalties that looked a bit like a collage of disparate Picasso paintings. In fact, if Picasso had painted a picture of the British Isles in his later career, you would have gone, that's exactly what it looks like. Incidentally, there'll be a link at the end to my video on how the Scots started the conflict of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. But for now, what was left of Leslie's Scottish army was heading south with Charles II to try to reach London whilst Cromwell was otherwise occupied up here. Now, what happened next was ultimately the Battle of Worcester, where Cromwell chased down to get to him. It was the end of the War of the Three Kingdoms and royalist hopes, at least for a while. As Oliver Cromwell chased Charles's army south to this denouement, he left a guy called General Monk in Scotland to mop up resistance. At the time, Dundee was a walled town around the shoreline down there. Now, what I'm hoping to do is to illustrate with some graphics later on how the town wall went around three sides, to the east, to the north and to the west, leaving the Tay estuary to border on the south side of the town. Now, obviously the town was much smaller in those days, and towards the north of the town, but inside the walls, was what is now the Steeple Churches, just in front of the Nethergate shopping centre, not far from the East Port where we were earlier. By August 1651, Stirling had capitulated, Perth had capitulated, St Andrews was gone. And the people of Dundee, well, The man in charge here in Dundee was Robert Lumsden. His family had had estates in Fife. He'd made his reputation as a mercenary in the Protestant cause during the 30 Years' War. He'd fought as an ally of Cromwell during the English Civil War, and now he was preparing to defend Dundee against those erstwhile allies. This experienced soldier set to his task. As I said earlier, this is the remaining east gate of the town wall, and Lumsden would have been busy organising repairs to the wall and shoring it up where needed. Some tenement buildings outside the town walls were demolished so that there'd be clear lines of sight to fire against invading forces. Volunteers were arriving from outlying districts, others from the surrounding areas came into the town for protection. If you were Texan, you'd probably have an image of the Alamo. By late August, Lumsden probably felt that he'd prepared as well as he could. He also expected support from elsewhere to relieve the town. You see, the de facto government of Scotland had based themselves at Alyth, 17 miles to the north. What he didn't know was that General Monk had already captured Alyth. Monk arrived to surround the town with a force of 5,000 to 7,000 men, cavalry, artillery and siege mortars. The people of Dundee would have watched from behind their wall. As cannon were placed and troops deployed around them, they must have waited and wondered. On the 26th of August, when all was prepared, a demand for Lumsden to surrender was sent. Lumsden refused. In fact, he suggested that it was Monk and his English forces who should lay down their weapons. A bitter siege was inevitable. Now, both men knew that the Scots had stored their national gold deposits behind the town walls for safekeeping. Capturing it would be an incentive for Monk, and more so for his troops. On August the 29th, the bombardment started. From the heights to the north and around the town, and from the ships in the estuary, they pounded the weak points of the walls and gates. Lumsden would have been going around about from place to place all around the town, assessing the damage and trying to encourage his men. As they returned cannon fire, they would have seen the breaches in the walls appear and then grow larger until they were big enough to risk an assault. It started at 4 in the morning on the 1st of September. Now, assaulting a walled town was a dangerous, brutal and bloody business. There would inevitably be death, dismemberment and mutilation on both sides. Outnumbered 5 to 1, Lumsden would have been rallying his men to try and make every effort against the superior forces pouring in through the gaps in the walls. At 11 o'clock, the west and east ports were breached. There was half an hour of brutal hand-to-hand combat, after which Lumsden pulled his men back here to Dundee's main church on the rise above the town to make their stand. But the English didn't assault the church. They surrounded it and packed it with wet straw, which they lit so as to smoke out the Scots. Choking and gasping for breath, the Scots realised that it was all over. All that Lumsden had left in his armoury was a white flag of surrender. Having received assurances from the English, Lumsden had his men led out through the door here and they put their weapons down. In one report, a General Butler on the English side approached Lumsden, the surrendering Scottish commander, and he shot him in the face. Then they cut off his head and mounted it on a spike. Of course, the English troops who had risked themselves in order to breach the town, they were due their reward, weren't they? Was freedom from Catholicism or Episcopalianism? What about the high ideals of a republic? Was that not reward enough? Or a town full of gold and victims now lying open to the biggest, most hypocritical bank heist since Nakatomi Plaza, Christmas 1988. Now, I'm aware of the anachronism. General Monk gave the order that Cromwell's disciplined, devout, new model army could have 24 hours of rape, pillage and plunder to their heart's content. And what was their heart's content? I can give you statistics. I could tell you that £10,000 Scots was the cost of repairing the damage. But what does that mean? I could tell you that the 200,000 gold coins that were looted were worth £12 billion in today's terms. Would that move you? I could tell you that some estimate that up to 20% of the population of Dundee were brutally killed. And that might not register. But 20%. Imagine if that was New York, London, Paris, Munich. Nobody would be talking about pop music then, would they? Based on the demographic viewing statistics that YouTube give me for my site, I'll be lucky if 50% of viewers will get that reference. The other 50% are too young to even know what proper music is. But I'm hoping that all of you will be thinking that making daft jokes like that means that I've seriously misjudged the tone of my own video. Statistics can pass us by unmoved. But imagine somebody bursting into your home, taking your possessions. Think about just one of the women raped, possibly multiple times. What about the civilian husband, father, brother trying to protect her, only to be brutally murdered himself? Statistics seem as offensive as an inappropriate joke. This may have been the worst day in Dundee's history. So what of this religious, regimented, new model army? What was their heart's content? We know that it wasn't satisfied in 24 hours. Their atrocities continued for weeks. The Battle of Worcester was fought and lost, and the War of the Three Kingdoms was effectively over before the plunder here was finished. It's interesting that the War of the Three Kingdoms had effectively been started by Scots opposing Charles I, and pretty much its last event was the devastation of Dundee here, a town holding out for his son. I suppose you should be careful what you wish for. Now, you can find out how these conflicts all started years before in my video, Scottish Causes of the English Civil War. And you should see that coming up now, here. In the meantime, ha mbeidh dóchas gún bí lá málaí. Cheerin Rasta.